Not even Grok likes a free rider. Below is a summation of what he thinks of parasites. Despite the content provided by Grok being put in quotation marks, some editorializing was necessary for the human reader. The meaning of what was said was, however, retained in all cases. Grok begins with a summary of his own. He says, "These healthy, able-bodied adults who choose not to work create a net economic and social drain on the community, primarily through resource transfers from productive members to non-productive ones, distorted incentives, and strained shared systems." This sums up the classic free rider problem that is central to economics. He goes on to say, "Parasites benefit from collectively funded or donated resources without contributing labor, taxes, or output. While welfare systems exist to support the truly vulnerable, disabled, elderly, children, or temporarily unemployed, this subgroup, by the premise of adding little or nothing, subtracts from the community's overall capacity without offsetting gains." Here's the breakdown, grounded in observable fiscal, productivity, and behavioral effects seen in Canada, relevant to Toronto, and comparable systems like the US. Taxpayer-funded welfare programs bear the brunt of the costs of parasites. In Canada, provincial social assistance, e.g., Ontario Works for Employable Adults, provides cash and benefits to non-workers, often supplemented by federal programs. These are paid from general tax revenues, income, sales, property taxes. Single working-age adults, a large share of such cases, make up 44% of food bank users and rely heavily on these programs, which studies link to sustained food insecurity because rates frequently fall below the poverty line, market basket measure. Nationally, poverty-related social assistance adds billions annually. Broader poverty costs Canadian healthcare alone $7.6 billion yearly in extra spending. Food banks add to the strain. These are mostly charitable, donations, volunteers, corporate surplus. Government may serve as a donor in some cases. Food banks are rarely funded by governments. However, non-working adult users of food banks increase demand on the food supply, increasing prices, without adding anything to the supply. In Ontario and the wider nation, food banks report heavy use by social assistance recipients. This diverts food, staff time, and donor dollars that could go to working poor families, seniors, or the disabled. Result: higher operational costs for charities, potential wait lists or reduced portions, and donor fatigue. Food bank users are rarely the food bank operators. This ultimately shifts more of the welfare burden back to taxpayers via reduced private giving or calls for government subsidies. Workers and businesses pay taxes that fund benefits given by governments. All benefits are transfers, a process that robs Peter to pay Paul even though Peter is under no debt of obligation to Paul. The recipients of welfare consume goods/services, food, housing aid, but produce none, lowering the community's total potential resources. Analogous U.S. data on able-bodied adults without dependence on SNAP/Medicaid shows potential taxpayer savings of $260 billion over 10 years from modest work requirements, as many shift to employment. Without contribution, it's pure redistribution from net payers to net takers. Healthy adults not working means fewer goods/services produced, lower GDP, and less tax revenue generated by their wages. Communities grow through labor participation. Non-participants shrink the pie everyone shares. In Canada, social assistance for working-age singles correlates with persistent poverty traps, unlike seniors' pensions, OAS/GIS, which cut food insecurity risk dramatically by providing stable, non-disincentivizing income. Pensions, unlike welfare payments, come out of savings created by the taxpayer and the companies they worked for. Funds spent on supporting unproductive adults cannot fund infrastructure projects. Welfare payments increase taxes for workers, even the working poor. Welfare payments reduce the money available for investment and job creation. Money spent supporting the indigent cannot improve schools or expand services. High marginal effective tax rates on those on welfare, where earning $1 can lose $0.50 to $1 plus in benefits plus taxes, discourage some recipients from taking on even part-time work, perpetuating the cycle of dependency. Canadian data on clawback programs in Ontario Works show this reduces the rate at which welfare recipients re-enter the workforce. The U.S. 1996 welfare reform work requirements cut caseloads down 60%, raised single mom employment from 58% to 75%, and grew the economy without broad harm to the vulnerable. These cases demonstrate that unemployment coupled with government assistance is, for some, a viable long-term strategy. Such persistent unemployment has the potency for eroding community work norms. Benefit cutoffs create poverty traps. Welfare recipients rationally limit earnings to keep income maximized with a mix of unemployment and welfare. This calculus reduces upward mobility for the client of government largesse. Intergenerationally, this can normalize lower labor force participation in affected networks. Time use data from similar U.S. groups on Medicaid shows clients spend 4.2 hours a day on watching TV and playing video games. This is more time spent on leisure than the 80 hours a month threshold suggested, which highlights the loss of human capital when people are paid without regard to productivity. Free riding breeds resentment. Taxpayers see their earnings subsidize able-bodied non-contributors while facing the ever-increasing burden that comes from paying their own costs. Costs like housing, which rise constantly with inflation. This can weaken support for safety nets overall, as seen in debates over welfare reform. In any community, unemployment and underemployment subsidies overloads local services, raises indirect costs, e.g., via higher property taxes to pay shelter subsidies and other forms of aid, and may correlate with subtle rises in petty crime or disengagement with society. Poverty itself generates isolation and some forms of antisocial behavior. Idleness may contribute to other forms of risky behavior such as alcohol and drug abuse, as well as prostitution or sexual promiscuity. Resources diverted to welfare and other social justice projections will limit the aid that can be directed towards those with real barriers: mental health, episodic disability, the aged, veterans, and child benefits. Canadian Food Bank data shows many users are permanent clients due to inadequate supports and a general unwillingness to devote a large portion of one's income to groceries after a long period when this expense was avoided. For the healthy non-worker, the need for food banks is or ought to be avoidable. When the food bank becomes a habitual source of help, it exacerbates wait lists and creates gaps elsewhere. Those who donate time and money and other resources to food banks may not have the means to help elsewhere. A basic safety net prevents destitution, which could cost the community more in the long run, with higher emergency room visits, higher rates of crime, and homelessness. One could assume without income supplements, vagrancy would increase along with property crime. Income supplementation may increase consumption and help stimulate the local economy, creating job opportunities. But for healthy adults adding little or no value to the economy while still consuming their share, these marginal benefits are far outweighed by the net fiscal drain, foregone output, and incentive harm reductions to the community's overall welfare, and are too small to matter. Evidence from the U.S. and Canadian pilots linking higher income to lower food insecurity shows work requirements or better designed supports, which may permit higher earning supplementation without full clawbacks, move people to self-sufficiency faster. This benefits everyone. People need to work and be self-sufficient for their dignity and the welfare of the community. In short, the impact on the economy of a large cadre of dependents is a smaller economic pie for all, higher burdens on those who work and donate, and weakened incentives for contribution. When large numbers eat but do no work, the ones who do work are required to pay a much larger share of their income to the common costs. This makes the community poorer and less resilient than if these adults participated productively. Addressing it via targeted reforms, e.g., time-limited aid with job supports, expands opportunity without abandoning compassion for the unemployed. But ultimately, the only solution is to eliminate the causes of unemployment, to make unemployment a greater problem than can be solved simply by providing transfers. Ultimately, it is not a right to work that will solve the problem, but the removal of all benefits from anyone who is better off when people are unemployed than when they work. Only when everyone suffers equally from the existence of unemployment and no one benefits from it will the problem of free riding be solved.